All right, so get this. We're going deep into the world of the Arctic ground squirrel.
Oh, cool.
You know, those little guys that basically spend like 8 months a year just hitting the snooze button?
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
They hibernate, right? But it's not just sleeping. Their bodies are doing some seriously crazy stuff while they're out for the count.
Yeah.
And we've got this research on their metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
What exactly did they look at?
Well, what's really cool about this study is it follows them through the whole year, not just during hibernation.
Interesting. So we can see how things change, like before and after they hibernate.
Exactly. So picture this. It's fall, leaves are turning all pretty colors,
Okay.
and our little squirrel buddy is on a mission to eat. I mean, seriously, they go nuts. Nuts, berries, you name it, they're packing on the pounds for the long sleep ahead.
Makes sense. They got to fuel up somehow, right?
Right. And as they're stuffing their faces, their bodies start shifting gears, like flipping a metabolic switch.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they need to convert all that food into fat. You know, it's like their energy savings account for the winter.
Makes sense. Fat stores a lot of energy.
And the research actually shows this, right? Like at this time, most of their tissues are using more oxygen.
Okay. So they're working overtime to, like, store all that fat.
Exactly. It's like their bodies are in, fast forward, getting ready for those long months of hibernation.
So everything's going into overdrive.
Pretty much. Except, well, there's one organ that doesn't quite follow the same pattern.
Which one?
The liver.
Interesting. What's going on with the liver?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? While everything else is going crazy storing fat, the liver's just kind of chilling out. Doesn't seem to be directly involved.
That is kind of strange. What do the researchers think is going on there?
Well, it suggests that maybe, just maybe, the liver's up to something else entirely during this prep period.
Like what?
Who knows? Maybe it's producing special enzymes or hormones the squirrel's going to need later on.
So the liver might be playing a more behind-the-scenes role in the whole hibernation process.
Totally. It's like the mastermind, making sure everything's in place. All right, so the squirrel fattens up, liver's doing its mysterious thing.
Right.
Then, boom, winter hits. They curl up in their burrows, heart rate drops like crazy.
Yep.
And they enter this crazy deep sleep.
You'd think their bodies would just go into, like, power save mode.
Like everything just shuts down.
Yeah, exactly. But turns out it's not that simple.
How so?
It's more of a gradual slowdown.
Interesting.
All their tissues eventually use less oxygen, but some take longer than others.
So there's a pecking order as to who gets to slow down first.
Kind of. The muscles in the liver, they seem to be the early
You
birds.
slow down quickly.
Yeah, they dial things back pretty fast. But the brain and the heart,
Yeah.
they take a while longer, like 6 to 9 days before they really drop their oxygen use.
It makes sense though, right?
Totally. Those organs got to keep running, at least a little bit. Yeah, I mean, imagine if your brain just completely shut off.
No thanks.
Right, exactly. The brain still needs to regulate temperature, make sure everything's ticking along.
Keep the lights on.
And the heart, obviously, got to keep pumping, even if it's really slowly.
And the muscle.
Well, they can afford to take a longer break, right? They don't need to be as active during hibernation.
It's like a carefully planned slowdown, everyone playing their part.
So what happens in the spring when they wake up? Does everything just go back to normal?
You'd think so, right? Like
Yeah.
hitting the reset button.
Right.
And for most tissues, that's exactly what happens. They bounce right back to their pre-hibernation activity.
What?
But the liver, well, the liver keeps things interesting.
What do you mean?
Even after waking up, its oxygen consumption stays pretty low.
It's not quite ready to join the party again.
It's like it's hesitant, like it's got some secrets from its winter vacation it's not telling us.
Yeah. So the liver is a mystery, even after all this research.
A total enigma. And that, my friend, is what continues to intrigue the scientists. So we've got this metabolic puzzle,
Okay.
and the liver seems to be holding a key piece.
So what's next? How do we figure out what the liver's doing?
Well, that's where the comparison comes in.
Comparison.
Yeah. The researchers also looked at rats,
Rats. Why rats?
because rats don't hibernate. It's like having a control group in a science experiment.
Ah, I see. So we can compare the squirrel's weird metabolism to a, quote, normal animal.
Exactly. It helps us figure out what's special about the squirrel, what really sets it apart.
So what did they find? Any big differences between the squirrels and the rats?
Oh, you bet there are. And some of them are pretty surprising, even when the squirrels aren't hibernating.
Oh, this is getting good. Lay it on me. What did they find?
So we've got our Arctic ground squirrels doing their metabolic thing, and we've got our rats, just being regular rats,
Right.
What happens when we compare them?
Well, get this. Even when they're not hibernating, the squirrels' brains and hearts use less oxygen than the rats.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, but there's more. Their muscles actually use more oxygen.
Wait, hold on. That seems backwards.
Doesn't it? You'd think they'd be super efficient all around.
Right.
Well, it actually makes sense when you think about their
Those
lifestyle.
long months of hibernation.
Exactly. Their heart and brain got to be super efficient to survive on barely any energy during that time.
So it's like they've sacrificed a little muscle efficiency for superpowered brains and hearts.
Pretty much. It's all about adapting to their unique needs.
Makes sense. Speaking of efficiency, the study also looked at what kind of fuel they were using during hibernation.
Oh, interesting. Were they burning carbs or fat?
I'm guessing fat, right? Seems like the ultimate energy source for a long winter's nap.
You got it. The study actually mentioned that previous research suggested they switched from burning carbs to burning fat during hibernation.
That's pretty cool. But how does that even work? Like, what's going on inside their cells to tell them to switch fuel sources?
Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of cellular metabolism.
Ooh, sounds complicated.
It is complex, but basically there are signals that tell the squirrel's body to start breaking down fat instead of carbohydrates.
So it's like flipping a switch, redirecting the flow of energy, but what's controlling the switch?
It's probably a combination of things. Hormones play a role for sure, but there's also evidence that enzyme activity changes during hibernation.
Hold on, enzymes. Didn't we talk about those earlier? Something about the liver?
You have a great memory. Yeah, the researchers did this experiment where they added citrate, a fuel source, to the liver tissue.
Why?
They wanted to see if the slowdown in liver metabolism during hibernation was just because it didn't have enough fuel.
So, like, if they gave it more fuel, would it perk up?
Exactly. But even with the extra fuel, the liver stayed pretty sluggish.
So it's not just about having enough gas in the tank.
Nope.
It's about how the engine itself is running. And enzymes might be involved in adjusting the engine settings.
That's a great way to put it. Enzymes are like the mechanics of the cell controlling all those chemical reactions.
Okay, so we've got hormones, enzymes, this whole fuel switching operation.
It's a lot.
It's like a carefully choreographed dance inside the squirrel's body.
Exactly.
But what happens when they wake up? Does the dance just reverse itself?
That's another area where we need more research. We know most tissues go back to normal, but how they switch back from burning fat to burning carbs, we're not totally sure yet.
You know, it makes you wonder if there are any lessons we can learn from these squirrels.
What do you mean?
Like, imagine if we could tap into their metabolic superpowers.
It's a fascinating thought. Could we use what we learn about hibernation to, like, treat metabolic disorders?
Or even induce a state of suspended animation.
Now you're getting into science fiction territory.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But honestly, after learning about all this, I wouldn't rule anything out. These squirrels are basically tiny metabolic marvels.
They really are, and their ability to adapt to these crazy conditions is just mind-blowing.
Speaking of adaptation, there was another cool detail in the study about those differences in oxygen use between the squirrels and rats.
Remind me.
You know how the squirrel brains and hearts were super efficient, but their muscles were actually using more oxygen?
Yeah, the paradox.
Well, the researchers thought that might be because of how active each tissue needs to be during hibernation.
Okay, go on.
Think about it. The brain and the heart, they got to keep working, even when the squirrel's hibernating, so they've evolved to be super efficient.
Makes sense. But what about the muscles? Why would they use more oxygen if they're basically inactive?
Well, the researchers thought it might be a way of getting them ready to spring back into action when the squirrel wakes up.
So it's like they're keeping the engine warm even though it's idling.
Exactly. So they can hit the gas quickly when they need to.
It's another layer of adaptation to their environment.
And that brings us to another interesting question.
What's that?
What role does the squirrel's diet play in all of this?
You mean all that carb loading in the fall?
Exactly. Could that be affecting their muscle metabolism?
It's definitely possible. A high-carb diet means more glucose in the blood, and glucose is a key fuel for muscles.
So maybe their higher muscle oxygen consumption is a reflection of their diet.
It's a fascinating connection. It suggests that their metabolic adaptations aren't just about surviving hibernation. They're also about making the most of their specific diet.
It's amazing how all these systems work together.
I know, right? The diet, the hibernation, the enzymes, the fuel switching.
It's like a perfectly orchestrated symphony of metabolic adaptation.
It really is a beautiful example of how evolution shapes life to thrive in even the toughest environments.
And the Arctic ground squirrel, they're a shining example of that.
For sure.
Well, I think we've covered a ton in this episode.
We have.
We talked about the seasonal changes in oxygen use,
Mhm.
the slowdown during hibernation, the differences between squirrels and rats,
Yep.
the fuel switching, the role of diet.
It's been a deep dive.
But before we wrap up, there's one more fascinating thing from the study we should mention. Remember how we were talking about the squirrels' brains and hearts using less oxygen, but their muscles using more?
Yeah, kind of weird, right?
Well, the researchers thought it might be a way of prepping their muscles, making sure they're ready to go when they wake up. But they also had another interesting idea.
What's that?
They thought it might be related to their diet before hibernation. All those carbs.
Ah, yeah, they're eating a ton of nuts and seeds to fatten up.
Exactly. And they think that high-carb diet might actually be connected to the higher oxygen use in the muscles.
So it's like they're fueling up, but instead of burning those carbs right away, they're storing them as fat.
And then during hibernation, they switch over to burning fat. It's pretty amazing.
It really is. Makes you wonder if there are any parallels in humans.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like when we exercise and our bodies start burning fat after using up carbs.
Exactly. Maybe by studying squirrels, we can learn more about how our own bodies regulate energy.
That would be incredible.
Absolutely. It just goes to show how much we can learn from nature.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Arctic ground squirrel, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners will remember?
I think the main point is that hibernation is so much more than just sleeping. It's this intricate metabolic dance where every part of their body plays a role in making sure they survive. It's amazing how they can adjust their metabolism, switch fuel sources, and get those muscles ready for action. A true testament to the power of adaptation.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll unlock the secrets of hibernation to help human health, push the boundaries of medicine, or even help us explore space.
That's a great thought. Until then, we should all keep exploring, keep learning, and keep being amazed by how diverse and adaptable life is on Earth.
Well said. That's a wrap for today's deep dive. See you next time.